No hesitation, no half measures. As President Trump declared yesterday, we're crushing the enemy in an overwhelming display of technical skill and military force. We will not relent until the enemy is totally and decisively defeated. Today will be, yet again, our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. No quarter, no mercy. The pressure around the Strait of Hormuz was building by the hour. The 3rd Infantry Division was on the move. Navy warships were surging forward. Marines were flooding the battle space around Hormuz until the coastline, the shipping lanes, and every suspected firing position came. The first signs of the deployment appeared before sunrise. On military bases, the first wave of heavy equipment was already moving toward the airfield. Long columns of Moan Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, armored Rikavra vehicles, and support trucks rolled slowly across the tarmac under floodlights, their engines growling in the dark as ground crews guided them toward waiting transport aircraft. C-17 Globemaster stood with their rear ramps lowered and cargo bays lit from within, ready to take in the armored convoy one vehicle at a time. Loadmasters stood at the ramps with headsets and signal wands, directing each driver forward with careful hand signals. Abrams tanks climbed the ramps slowly under their own power, steel tracks grinding against the metal surface as they crossed into the aircraft and were positioned precisely along the cargo floor. Spare parts, fuel containers, communications gear, and maintenance equipment. Once inside, chains were hooked to the T-down points while blocks were set, and every vehicle was secured tight for the long flight ahead. Inside the staging area, the tempo shifted fast as soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division gathered in tight groups beneath the harsh lights of the departure hall, their gear laid out in organized stacks beside them, while they waited for the order to move to the aircraft. Helmets, rucksacks, ammunition pouches, medical kits, batteries, night vision devices, spare uniforms, and personal weapons were checked one final time before being packed in secure for the flight. Rifles were removed from their cases, inspected, cleared, and slung back over shoulders once serial numbers had been verified. Platoon leaders moved through the room, issuing final instructions, calling out departure times, aircraft assignments, and load plans for each section. Squad leaders checked names, counted personnel, and made certain every soldier had his assigned weapon protective gear. And mission equipment. Nothing was left to chance. Every bag was opened, checked, sealed, and checked again to make sure that once the call came to board, the unit could move out with everything it needed.
I don't think we'll use it then. I think usually we cut it.
Soldiers formed into tight lines beside the aircraft and began boarding the C-17 one file at a time, moving up the rear ramp under the direction of the loadmasters. Each man carried his combat gear close to his body, stepping carefully over the metal floor tracks as he entered the cargo bay and moved toward his assigned place along the sidewall seats. Once inside, they sat shoulder to shoulder in long rows running the length of the aircraft, their rucksacks stowed, weapons secured, and helmets either resting on their laps or clipped to their gear. Crew members moved down the aisle checking seating positions, confirming head counts, and making sure every soldier had fastened his safety harness correctly. The straps were pulled tight across their chests and waists, gloves were adjusted, and final words were exchanged over the noise of the aircraft systems coming alive. The cargo remained locked in place, chains pulled tight against armored vehicles and pallets loaded for the flight. With every preparation complete and every man in position, the compartment settled into a tense silence. The doors were sealed, the final checks were complete, and the mission had begun. But it was not only the airlift that was moving. Far closer to the Strait of Hormuz, naval forces were already pressing toward the coastline. Amphibious ships, destroyers, and escort vessels advanced in formation as the fleet closed the distance to the contested shore. Their radars turned constantly, guns warm and combat systems remained active as the ships pushed deeper into the approaches. Marines gathered beside their gear while landing craft crews prepared their boats for movement. Ramps were checked, Engines were tested, and the well decks were brought to life as crews made ready to launch troops and equipment toward the coast if the order came. Overhead, patrol helicopters moved in wide circles above the formation, scanning the sea surface and the shoreline for drones, missile teams, and fast attack craft hidden near the water. Below deck, combat information center crews tracked every contact, watched the coast around the clock, and fed updates to the ships closing in offshore. This was not a routine transit. While Army forces were still loading by air, the Navy was already tightening its hold from the sea, building the pressure for a possible amphibious push near Hormuz. By the time the naval force reached the target area, the first assault elements had already gone ashore around the Gulf. Marines moved quickly off the landing craft and secured the shoreline, the nearby approaches, and the first key positions overlooking the objective. Behind them, more troops and equipment were brought in from the sea as the ships held close offshore, feeding men and supplies into the growing foothold. At the same time, the airlifted forces that had arrived earlier were already in place farther inland, holding staging areas, securing approach routes, and linking their positions to the coastal units coming in from the water. Helicopters continued to patrol above both sectors, moving along the shoreline and out over the water while feeding updates back to the command posts below. What had started as separate movements by air and sea was now becoming one connected operation. The naval landing force had established itself on the coast. The airborne elements were already holding ground nearby, and together they had begun locking down the wider area around forces moved in to expand the operation. When the fighting finally erupted, the force that had been assembled by air, sea, and land moved with overwhelming speed and coordination. The Marines who had already come ashore from the Gulf pushed inland from the coastline, clearing the first line of resistance and tightening their hold on the landing sectors. Airborne and forward deployed units that had arrived earlier were already in position on the approaches, holding road junctions, staging grounds, and high ground overlooking the target area. As the battle widened, the heavier ground elements moved in behind them, linking the entire operation into one continuous line of pressure around the Strait of Hormuz. American forces had taken control of multiple critical positions on both the coast and the inland approaches. Enemy launch teams had been driven back. Their ability to strike the shipping lanes had been broken, and the chain of resistance around the objective had collapsed under constant pressure. The United States had not only won the battle for the surrounding ground, but had imposed operational control over the Strait of Hormuz itself. The waterway was open again. The key terrain was in American hands, and the force that had come in by sea, air, and land was now fully in position to hold what it had taken.